A warm welcome to all our viewers, to our series Natural Medicine. Today we're going to talk to Dr. Heinz Lüscher about the subject of irritable bowel syndrome and above all, whether it really is caused by psychosomatics or whether completely different causes play a role and how you manage to get into a good healing process with this topic. You can find out here. Stay tuned. Hello dear Heinz.
Hello Corina.
Nice that you are here.
I'm happy to be there.
We already had a really great interview on the subject of bioidentical hormones that got me already fascinated, just this holistic approach of the patient with this naturalness. An irritable bowel syndrome, there are a lot of theories about it. There are those who label it as classically psychosomatic, some say it's chronic, you have to live with it. And I'm always happy about new theories in academic medicine. And I'm happy when there are doctors like you who have this holistic approach.
I hope I'm not proclaiming a theory here, but rather a solution.
Yes, that's even better. How do you see irritable bowel syndrome?
Irritable bowel is relatively well researched. Intestinal research has made tremendous progress in recent years. In the field of microbiome, research is being carried out worldwide, so it's really sensational and you can hardly keep up with findings that have to be learned again. There was a Professor Novak in Germany. He unfortunately passed away and he has researched the gut for 40 years. His research is like the basics for me. During my studies I heard that irritable bowel was called colon irritable back then. As the word suggests, it is an irritated colon, the large intestine, irritated by the nerves. So the psyche controls the intestines, and when the psyche is agitated or something is wrong, then intestinal disorders follow. And that has been clearly refuted in the meantime. This nervus vagus, which supplies the intestines from the brain, we now know that 90% of messages go from the gut to the brain and not the other way around. To put it bluntly, we could say that the gut controls the brain. That's a completely new perspective. Now though, 10% of the stimuli are still going from the vagus to the gut, and that's why when you're nervous when you have an exam or have to be on television, then you can get nervous and that can lead to intestinal disorders. But this is not an illness, these are temporary phenomena, but the irritable bowel as a whole, where you have had complaints for years, this is a clearly defined illness.
When people come to you who have really been suffering from this irritable bowel syndrome for 20 or 30 years, there are certainly also medications that are then taken over a period of time that in turn can probably cause consequential damage or nutrients cannot be supplied properly. What does a patient look like after 20 years of irritable bowel syndrome?
Well, if it takes that long, well, I hope people will get in touch beforehand, but almost all the patients who come to me with irritable bowel syndrome have been suffering for several years. And there are exceptions up to 20 years, they have an odyssey behind them. They've been to the gastroenterologist 3 to 4 times, the intestines and stomach were checked, some have already been to a psychiatrist, because they say it is an imaginary disease. I really feel sorry for these people, they are completely exhausted because of the disturbance in their intestines. Many necessary micronutrients that are needed for the body's energy production cannot be absorbed well in the intestines. These people suffer from a lack of energy and become more and more exhausted. And in the end, the exhaustion is almost worse than the intestinal problems. And in the gut itself, the most common symptom is bloating. Annoying, right? When you're somewhere and there's air leaking and there's nothing you can do about it. stomach pain, often constipation or diarrhea. I then try to find out what in the diet these patients cannot tolerate. That's my first approach. An irritable bowel is a long-term consequence of incompatible foods or other toxins, pesticides, or any chemical substances that we ingest, but very often intolerable food, and people don't know that.
What I've also often heard is that people with irritable bowel syndrome react extremely on raw food, lettuce and vegetables, when you actually think it would actually be healthy. And that's the crux. They can't eat healthily because they say I feel better with bread and pasta, but conversely, that is no better for the intestinal walls. And how do you get out of this cycle? Because I don't think the patients who suffer from irritable bowel syndrome, who cannot tolerate vegetables not because they cannot tolerate it, but simply because the intestines are so inflamed. If it were all right again, that would of course be a good thing. In itself, it is not a general intolerance, but this intestine in this diseased state is unable to digest healthy food. And how do you start there so that it regulates itself again?
Well, that's absolutely right. People say I can't eat onions or cabbage or something, sauerkraut. It's not because of these vegetables, they are very well tolerated, but they cause the complaints. The cause of an irritable bowel syndrome are other foods, gluten in the first place. And a gluten intolerance is not celiac disease, that's something completely different. But gluten damages the gut lining, the villi are thinning, the lining gets damaged, and over time, if this mucous membrane is always a bit swollen, because when we have flatulence, histamine is produced in the intestine. This is then called histamine intolerance, but that's not true. We're not intolerant of histamine, we have too much, And if you drink another glass of wine now, that too is high in histamine, then the barrel overflows. But it's not the cause. Histamine is a consequence from a lot of flatulence, and the flatulence is triggered by gluten, dairy products, and in third place eggs. There are many reasons why it's these three foods. I cannot go into detail now. I think there are other shows about it. So I have to ask about these three in the medical history, how the patients tolerate these foods. Sometimes, they say, I can take anything, nothing happens to me. So I also have IBS patients, where none of these three groups are the cause, then it becomes a little more difficult, but nothing changes in the treatment.
What does it look like? Are you allowed to say it? The exciting conversations are always when the cameras are off.
No, they can stay on. I usually start with zeolite. Zeolite is a volcanic rock that is ground very, very finely. It is available in capsule form or in powder form. Zeolite binds this excess histamine incredibly efficiently. I believe there are shows about zeolite and it's worth taking a look at. So zeolite is just great, virtually no side effects, sometimes a bit constipation, but then I decrease the dose and wait for the constipation to go away, and then I increase the dose again.
Although that also happens when people don't drink enough.
No, zeolite itself can cause it.
Even if you drink enough?
Yes. But it's not permanent, you don't have to do without zeolite, you just have to get used to it a bit. So zeolite is the one incredibly good solution, costs almost nothing, has no side effects, it does not enter the body. And it binds to those histamines in the gut, and that's why this inflammation decreases slowly and this overproduction of histamine.
What is also interesting for many viewers is how do I recognize a histamine intolerance? I know that, for example, with a glass of wine, when someone sits across from me and they get a bright red neck, that's how it is for me now. Or what do you say to that?
This person has an irritable bowel syndrome that needs to be treated. So the histamine excess can be so high that it leads to allergic reactions.
And a lot of people don't even know what it is. They then think they have a wine allergy or something.
And unfortunately, I hear that a lot. People have had 3 colonoscopies and the gastroenterologist says I can't see anything. It's likely just an irritable bowel, just psychosomatic. And I think it's a shame that gastroenterologists don't delve deeper into this clinical picture.
How do you deal with the whole fungus issue in the gut? Or if, for example, also the protein breakdown does not work properly and then you have all the toxins, what are they called again? Those aren't cadaveric poisons, but if the protein doesn't break down properly and then in the gut. Do you know what I mean? So ammonia and all.
Ammonia is a waste product of protein digestion.
Decay. This decomposition thing, which also repoisons the body.
Ammonia is also absorbed by zeolite, also heavy metals, so it's really a detox. You asked about the therapy, so that's just the beginning. It's not the whole therapy for an irritable bowel. Zeolite is just the beginning. I have to get rid of this inflammation and histamine. Now afterwards you have to build up the intestines. I very often give turmeric along with the zeolite. Turmeric is a wonderful natural anti-inflammatory.
How do you give it? Are you doing a mix or just the powder?
Capsules.
In capsules.
You can also use powder. You can also use the spices, of course. But it has to be good organic turmeric. But it all tastes the same. If you season it with turmeric, it's not as tasty. And that's why most patients prefer the capsules. So turmeric helps to alleviate this intestinal inflammation, these symptoms. And this first phase usually lasts about 4 months on average. And then people feel a lot better, not all of them. When these complaints, the flatulence still remains, then I have to keep looking. You can then do a food intolerance test. That's not always very accurate, but then I have no choice but to really look for what's bothering this bowel if my therapy doesn't help. But it is estimated that 80% are much better after a few months. And now the gut still needs to be built up. You mentioned the fungus. I don't treat fungus, so candida in the intestine. I build the microbiome and then the candida usually goes away by itself. It takes a good probiotic and unfortunately there are fewer good ones on the market. So I demand that at least 10 strains of bacteria are in it. And you have to look for that. For a long time now not all products have had 10 or more. I have a product that has 30 strains of bacteria in it.
And then the body regulates itself, or I have to do it individually, because not every intestine has the same thing again.
Exactly. The microbiome is as individual as your fingerprint. Each person has a different composition. But it regulates that itself. We have around 2,500 to 3,000 different types of bacteria in our intestines. Recent research. And we can't even know them. But what we can do is bring 30 of the most important back into a good number. And then the rest takes care of itself.
Nutritionally, are you doing anything to rebuild a microbiome? Reasonably.
Yes, of course. The bacteria need food, right? These are indigestible fibers, so vegetables. Then you can eat the onions and cabbage again in this phase, and then it will be fine. So it's very important to eat a healthy diet high in fiber. That's a condition to stay healthy afterwards. But I have another product, which is called, I have to name it because there is only this, it is called Neovital. This is an ingenious product. The active ingredients in it aren't special. It has turmeric in it and B12 and quercetin and B vitamins, but it's technically made that's bound to alpha-lipoic acid. It is a special carrier system that allows these nutrients to pass through the intestinal wall and get into the body, which was not or only partially possible before. And so the entire absorption capacity of the intestine, the mucous membrane, is improved with this product. It is a purely natural product, but with many patents and very complicated details in it. I give that to everyone. I've had great experiences with it.
Independent of the irritable bowel or related to that?
Especially in the case of IBS, because the intestines are the human engine. I often tell people, your car doesn't run, now you go to the workshop and the mechanic says, we suggest we put new tires on it. It's often like that. It often seems to me like this. When the intestines don't work, then the person is not with energy and cannot be healthy. You can't be healthy without a healthy gut.
And especially with such long-term irritable bowel patients, if you do a nutrient analysis, because that's also your passion, what are the extremes, where you say for God's sake? I always have that with them, and that's missing across the board and it doesn't reach.
Ausschläge, wo du sagst, Gottes Willen, also das habe ich immer bei denen und es fehlt auf ganzer Linie und es kommt auch nicht an.
So very often vitamin D is missing. Almost the entire population who does not supplement it has a deficiency. The whole iron metabolism is usually too low, especially in women. Omega-3 fat levels blatantly low in all people who do not consciously consume omega-3 products or eat a lot of fish. Then also the trace elements, magnesium, which is too low in 3/4 of the people, is hardly measured, and so forth. Or you can measure the amino acids. I see big flaws there.
And then there's the fact that a classic family doctor gets such a standard lab result, and I also saw in the last one that the EU, for example, has completely different standard values than Germany now, which are significantly lower. So there is no consensus on that either. How do you work? Do you work according to these normal ranges, where you classify your patients, or do you fall back on other values?
Primarily the normal ranges, but for many micronutrients they are too low. That's true. Let's take vitamin D. The normal range in Switzerland is 50 to 150 nanomoles per liter, in Germany over 20 nanograms per liter. So myself, I'm at 240, 250 myself, that's where I set myself. In Germany that would be 80, 90. And that's how I feel fine. Well, academic medicine recommendation for vitamin D is 800 units per day. I've been taking 4000 to 5000 for years. So in many areas the information is too low, I agree.
How do you deal with things like especially vitamin C and things like that? There are also many theories. One says it can only be in conjunction with a natural plant vitamin C, the other relies on infusions.
Yes, vitamin C is important for the immune system and many other metabolic processes, preferably biological ones. With vitamin C, I tend to tell people just eat fruit and berries and take it in naturally. That's actually the solution there. If it really isn't enough, you can add another capsule. As a rule, vitamin C is sufficient. But the B vitamins and E and A, the fat-soluble vitamins, are also often too low when measured. And that's where you need a product.
And the gut has to work, right?
Yes, that's the reason. An irritable bowel does not absorb nutrients well, and therefore, it's no use pouring tons of nutrients into it, but the intestines remain diseased. Then the body cannot absorb it. So the intestinal cleansing is a key to good health.
Did we forget something else? We now have zeolite, then probiotics.
This neovital.
Neovital.
Yes, vitamin D, omega-3, magnesium, you can add that because they are products which are necessary substances to maintain a healthy immune system. And 70% of the immune system is prepared or formed in the intestine. And that's why I also need these substances for the immune system.
What do the patients do after the 3rd of April months if they really manage to get out of this syndrome? What do you do during this holding phase?
So a change in diet is really important. Who then falls back again and continues to live only on chips and cake, they will get another one then. After that, it's crucial to change to a plant-based diet and enough protein and good oils, that's all part of it. But a really balanced diet is then necessary, otherwise it comes back.
Great. Thank you so much for the explanation. It's always important because there are far too many people out there with these complaints and have the feeling somehow no one helps. And you have to say that doctors like you, who simply have this holistic view, have also taken the time to look at these studies and because you used to have a family doctor's practice, did you have the opportunity and the time to get to intensively deal with such issues?
Hattest du da überhaupt die Möglichkeit und die Zeit, dich mal intensiv mit solchen Themen zu beschäftigen?
No, back then, that was the irritable colon, so you give something to calm it and you didn't look at the intestines back then. Even today, the patients tell me about their odyssey, like how many doctors they visited and no one took them seriously. Incidentally, that's what depresses me the most, this statement, my doctor didn't take me seriously. I hear that every day. It hurts me for these people. It's our job to take people seriously, even if they may not all be the simplest.
Yes. And you can also, I say from my own experience, take responsibility for your health at some point and take it into your own hands. Do some research yourself, and then it's just like that when I go to a doctor who can analyze a saliva hormone analysis for me, it is probably not the one being paid for by the insurance. And of course that's one of those things where I say, you could probably save yourself a lot of time if you really just dedicate it to a competency and say, okay, now I'm going to do all in one go with an intestinal analysis and a blood count.
I recommend to all patients, take the management of your illness into your own hands. Doctors are advisors, but you have to make your own decisions about what you want to do. Unfortunately, not many people can do that, but that would be for the best. I like the patients best who deal intensively with their illness and make decisions by themselves. They don't have to do what I say, it doesn't hurt me. I'm happy when they actively think along.
Great. Thank you very much, dear Heinz. It was nice. Good luck on your way, and we hope to see you again soon. Dear viewers, I hope you were also able to take new impulses and opportunities with you on the subject of irritable bowel syndrome in the healing phase, and thanks for watching. Have a wonderful time and see you soon. Bye.